Hey everybody, welcome to Rise Up with Nekima Armstrong. Happy Friday. It is the 5th day of Black History Month. Even though I personally celebrate Black History Month 365 days a year, I live it, I breathe it. It's important for us to still carve out time this month to specifically lift up the accomplishments of African Americans and fighting against oppression, standing up for justice, and just refusing to be refused for what we deserve to have access to in this country. We help build this country. So it's our birthright to be able to access the fruits of our labor. So I'm Nekima Armstrong, civil rights attorney, activist, founder of the Racial Justice Network, and the executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation. I am so excited today to bring to you my special guest, Dr. Melina Abdullah. Melina and I go way back when I was an undergrad student at the University of Southern California in LA. Melina was a grad student, and she just looked like the sweetest young lady on campus, this beautiful long braided ponytail. She just seemed just calm, cool, and collected. And then years later, I went to a Black Lives Matter retreat. I want to say that it was in Ohio. And I walked by this woman who had on like a army fatigue jacket. And I did a double take. And I walked up and I said, "Are you Melina?" And she said, yeah, she was a part of the movement, not only a part of the movement for Black Lives, but one of the founders of Black Lives Matter LA, one of the most outspoken people in the movement, highly intelligent, of course, and just no nonsense when it comes to tackling issues of white supremacy and telling it like it is. So it's my honor to bring Dr. Melina to our show today. How are you doing, Melina?
Hey, soror, and we want to also mention that we're sorority sisters, and and it was really just a blessing to find each other again through movement. So I feel fortunate to be with you.
Wonderful. So can you tell people a little bit about your background, right? We know that you are a professor at Cal State LA, and also the director or former director of the Pan-African Studies Department. So how, and I was a law professor once upon a time for about 14 years. And I've walked away from academia for the most part. And now, of course, just out here in the movement and doing the work that I do. But you are still a professor and you are 10 toes down in the movement. So how did you get to this place where you are standing out here fighting for Black lives?
Well, I've always been a part of the struggle for justice. I was born in the 70s in Oakland, California. It's impossible to be from that time and space and not be immersed in movement, right? We are the Panther Cub generation, hip hop generation, and have always been taught. It's in the air that you rise up when there's right? You rise up against oppression and you don't just submit to it. And so I've always been immersed in that work. I've never been a joiner though, right? And so it wasn't until George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. We want to especially lift up Trayvon Martin today on his birthday, right? And we want to make sure that we say his name and summon his spirit into this space. When George Zimmerman, a white supremacist who wasn't really white and wasn't really the cop that he created in his own mind, was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin, many of us all across the country and around the globe rose up And in Los Angeles, there were thousands of us in the streets engaging in what Dr. Brenda Stevenson calls intuitive organizing, right? Shutting it down, making our voices heard. And on the third day of protest, my sister, friend, comrade, Patrice Cullors, initiated a text, and it said, meet at 9 p.m. at St. Elmo Village. And St. Elmo Village is this Black artist community in mid-city Los Angeles. And I had been in the streets for 3 days with both my biological children, who at the time were 3, 6, and 9, as well as my spirit children, my students in Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA. And so I passed along that text. And that night, which was July 15th, 2013, we pledged to build a movement, not a moment. And you know, I feel like it was a stepping into our sacred duty, that we have a sacred duty to move forward and pick up the mantle that was handed to us, especially when we think about what is Black History Month, as you started talking about, that we celebrate and commemorate Black history every single day. Well, the best way that we honor those who walked before us, the way that we honor Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks, whose birthday was yesterday, the way that we honor them is by doing work in their honor, by making sure that we hold on to that mantle. And so kind of adjusting and acknowledging that means that all the parts of me, my mama self, my professor self, my sister friend self, even my soror self, right, has to be committed to ushering in justice and doing the sacred work of making the world more free.
Now, I'd have to imagine that you are a very rare person in academia who is not just writing about the struggle for freedom, justice, and equality, but who is actually physically putting your body, your life, and your livelihood on the line to stand up for what you believe in. How have you resisted the urge to remain in the ivory tower of academia, the safe space? Because so many people who are watching right now are unfortunately kind of locked into a cycle where it's about self-protectionism and, you know, being straight-laced and, you know, staying out of the danger zone. And it can be a challenge for people to make that transition because there's so much at stake. You know, when you go out there and you're facing arrest and you're facing criticism and violence, you know, at the hands of the police. So how do you maintain your sense of focus as both an academic, an activist, a mother, and all of the other things that you do?
Well, I think that what this system of white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism tries to do is feed us the lie of exceptionalism, feed us the lie that we can find a comfortable place in oppression. And the truth is that we can't, and that any semblance of comfort, any semblance of exceptionalism is tentative, right? So they might say, well, you know, you're a professor, you have doctor in front of your name, or say to you that you're an attorney and you have an ESQ behind your name, right? That is a false assurance. And so we have to make sure, you know, one of my favorite books right now, and I don't know if you've read it yet, but another of my attorney friends, attorney comrades, is Jody Armour, who is professor of law at USC. And he wrote this phenomenal new book called N Theory, right? N-word theory. I don't say the N-word, but that's the name of the book.
Oh, okay. Got you. So N expletive theory.
Right.
Okay, got it.
And in the book, what he does is challenge Black people to cast off the idea that we are good Negroes, right? That because he lives in Baldwin Hills, because he lives in a fancy house in Baldwin Hills and drives a European car, and is not only a professor of law, but the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at USC, that he's somehow different than his father, who spent decades incarcerated on a drug offense, right? So rather than feeding into the lie of exceptionalism, our charge is to identify with the N-words of the world, right? So to say that, we're not just aligning with he goes into, there's this beautiful and loving critique of the new Jim Crow, right? And he talks about how in the new Jim Crow, there's a conversation about nonviolent offenders and about people who were in prison who really didn't do it. And he says, that's actually not who we should align with. We need to also align with the ones who are violent offenders and really did do it, because only by working towards their freedom do we develop a world of actual freedom. And so I'm saying that to say that I'm grateful that I've been nurtured and mentored by phenomenal folks like, I think you and I both had Dr. Michael Preston at USC, who is now an ancestor, right? I've had Mr. Navies, who was my first Black Studies teacher when I was in high school, right? And I was fortunate enough to be mentored at Howard University and be nurtured to go on to get a PhD. I have a wonderful teacher mom who, my mother, we lived in the hood, but my mother was the teacher in the hood, right? And I'm very fortunate. However, that is not who I am. These are the experiences that have led me to a place where I can afford to feed my children, even as a single mother. I can afford to feed my children. I have relatively stable employment, and I can pay my bills even in the midst of a pandemic, at least for the time being. That is all fleeting. That can be taken away at any moment. And who my people are the people who cannot. And so I'm saying all that in response to this question that, we can't tether ourselves to a system that oppresses our people, but also feeds us the lie that we're part of this oppressive system and we benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty deep. How do your students respond to who you are as a professor and who you are as an activist? Because I noticed there was an article that came out in the LA Times in February of last year that talked about you suing the city and the former chief of police, I believe Charlie Beck, for wrongful arrest. So how do you, deal with that with their students? Do they just embrace who you are, or do they challenge who you are?
So I have a reputation. I have a reputation, and the students who enroll in my classes, I'm fortunate that they appreciate who I am, right? They're taking my class because of who I am. This last semester, I taught Black Power, which is an upper division Pan-African Studies class. And, the course cap is 40. And I had my 40 university enrolled students. But, we were all of academia is now forced to teach our classes online. And I was resistant to it at first, right? I'm going, how do I generate the spiritual energy in the class when there's no physical space for the class, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's really nothing I can do about that, right? So I do the best I can to generate that energy online. But what it reminded me, so we had just issued what we call the Freedom Campus demands. And there were 3 kind of categories of those demands. Moving police off campus, right? No, defund campus police, abolish campus police was one. Number 2 was making authentic ethnic studies a pillar of the university, right? So investing in authentic ethnic studies, not this watered down version that, you know, a lot of folks want to push, right? But the third was open university, making the university accessible to everyone, right? Because I teach in a public university. And so it's really important that we think about why public university systems were created. And they've become more and more exclusive, both because folks can't afford them, but also through admissions policies. And what I realized is that in teaching online, now I'm not going to grade everybody's paper, but why couldn't class be available to everybody, right? So I decided, okay, I'm a Facebook Live all my classes. And the university hated it, right? But my students who were university enrolled students, I got their buy-in before I did it because I wanted to make sure they were comfortable with it. I gave them the option of giving themselves pseudonyms, of turning their cameras off, of whatever made them feel comfortable. But at the end of class, when I asked them to assess the class, that's the part of the class they appreciated the most. They were inviting their parents and their siblings and their friends to come to class with them. I would regularly have 5,000 and 10,000 folks watching these class sessions. And so when you say, what do my students make of me? I think that the students really want liberation too. And I think they're appreciative of faculty who understand that when we call ourselves educators, that is also sacred. That's also a space that we need to take seriously and think about how we use it as a space to develop intellectual tools to make the revolution. And so I'm fortunate that my students are students who choose to take me, because I'm not for everybody, right? But the students who choose to take me, I think appreciate that.
That's really powerful. So if people want to access those lectures, are they still available?
Yep, they're all on my Facebook page. So you got to go through it because actually, if I could find out, there is one of my students did for her project. She made a website and all of them are compiled there. We called it Black Power University. But I don't remember the actual website. It's something like that. I think it might be just BLCK Power University that she developed it as, and they're all there.
That sounds so powerful. And I love this notion of being able to bring the classroom to the masses and to build that bridge, because so often, like you said, there's this notion of exceptionalism amongst Black people that often keeps us in a box and keeps us away from fighting for the liberation for all Black people, particularly those who are most poor, on the margins, and who are most likely to experience police violence. Now, I want to shift for a minute, and I want Josh to, our producer, to queue up a tweet that I found that is a really, I mean, it's amazing when you think about what you all did in LA. So Josh, I think that Melina's having trouble hearing the show. Can you hear now?
I can hear. It's just when you're doing things at home in the middle of the day with your kids, my doorbell is ringing and I'm trying to figure out who to answer the door. So I'm muting myself.
Oh, okay. So I'm glad it's not a technical issue. But so it's the second link that I sent you, Josh. So he's trying to pull the link up. But essentially, there was a situation, and I believe it was last year or so, where several of you guys from BLM-LA went to the home of Jackie Lacey, who at the time was the district attorney. And it was 5:30 in the morning. I think it was the day before the primary election. And you weren't greeted with a smile, but Jackie Lacey's husband actually pulled a gun on you and others. And so I found a tweet that talked about that particular incident. And I find it interesting that she did not win her re-election. And she's an African-American woman. And sometimes when we're taking on political figures, if the person is African American, we're less likely to speak up, to stand up, and to challenge them. So can you talk about that? That just looks, it blows my mind that he would feel comfortable pulling a gun on y'all. You're still muted.
So there's still an open lawsuit on this. So what happened, and I'm going to, as an attorney, you know that I can't say everything because there is a lawsuit on this. And he's still being charged criminally with this act. We had been pushing Jackie Lacey Must Go for 3 years at this point. So Jackie Lacey was the district attorney of Los Angeles County, was the district attorney of Los Angeles County. We'll talk about why she's no longer, right? She had signed off. At that point, there were about 600 folks who'd been killed by police on her watch. By the end of her term, 634 people had been killed by police in Los Angeles County since she took office. Wow. And she refused to charge those officers. We began, Black Lives Matter was birthed right at the time, almost right along the lines of when she was first elected to office, right? So she had been in office 8 years, we're 7.5 years old. And so we began thinking, well, maybe we can work with this Black woman district attorney, the first African-American, the first woman to lead the largest DA's office in the country. And so we started by reaching out to her saying, what can we do, right? We wanted to get the murderer of Ezell Ford charged. And we had a few meetings with her. And she basically said, well, let me see what I can do. And we tried to move forward in a way, you know, we don't always want to be adversarial. If we can work together with electeds, we will, right? Or with any kind of political leader, we will, if they're working on behalf of the people. But finally, and so we put a lot of pressure on the police department. We put a lot of pressure on the sheriffs, on other local police departments in the county. But then finally, we had been protesting on behalf of Keisha Michael and Marquentin Sandlin, who was a Black couple who was sleeping in their car in Inglewood, California. They were on their way home from a night and, I don't know, got tired, pulled over, went to sleep. And instead of caring for this couple, Inglewood Police Department shot these folks to death, leaving 7 children without their parents. And so for a period of about 1.5 years, we pressured Inglewood City Council to take action. And they eventually did fire the 5 police officers who murdered Keisha Michael and Marquentin Sandlin. Part of our work and leading our work was the twin sister of Keisha Michael, Trisha Michael. And after we got the officers fired, even as we're celebrating it as a victory, not the victory, but a victory, Trisha says that's not enough. You know, these officers can go get a job at LAPD or Gardena PD or Torrance PD. We have to get them prosecuted. And so we launched a petition to Jackie Lacey. More than 10,000 Angelenos signed it. And we tried to deliver it to her office, and we were met. She called the sheriffs on us who occupied the same building, and they brutalized us and pushed us out the building, and she refused to come down and take the petition. It's just a petition that we were delivering to a public building during office hours, right? And she wouldn't take it. And so what wound up happening is she refused to engage the people. And so we said, we'll be back every single week. And I know it's a long story, so I'll speed it up.
Go ahead.
So we began protesting and demanding that she prosecute killer cops. Finally, in December this was 2017. In December, we finally get a call. I get a call from her. And she says, okay, I'll meet with you, because the other piece of it is she wouldn't even meet with her constituents, right? And so she said, I'll meet with you. We have a date, we have a location. And then she calls back and says, you know, I have second thoughts and I'm not going to do it. And she reneged. So we had this community meeting. She didn't show up. And it was at that time, January 2014, that we shifted from prosecute killer cops to Jackie Lacey must go. And did I say 2014? January 2018, I'm sorry. We shifted to Jackie Lacey must go. And we begin protesting, continue to protest, but we start amplifying that we got to get her out. So every single week we're protesting outside her office. She won't meet with us. She won't come out. She won't engage. We're making phone calls. We're doing everything possible. And then finally, as she's running for re-election in the 2020 elections, we start, when she announced that she was running for re-election, we start this Follow Lacey, Follow Jackie campaign. And everywhere she goes, we show up. If she's doing a fundraiser, her kickoff, we had 1,000 people outside the restaurant that she was doing her kickoff at, right? She had to cancel her campaign launch as a result. So everywhere she goes, we go, right? Trying to get her attention. So finally, we decided, as she's in the midst of this campaign, no, you're not going to run away from the people. And at one of the places where we're kind of following her, it was the Stonewall Democratic Club, which is the largest queer and trans democratic club, I think, in the country. And we went there where she was speaking, and we went with a bunch of the families who had been with us at all of these protests. And we're trying to hold her accountable, and she commits. This is December of, is this December? Yeah, December of 2019. Maybe it's later than that. I don't know. But she commits to having a meeting with us. Yeah, it is December, because this is just before the primary. She commits to meeting with us. She reneges on the meeting, and we kind of push and push and push, and, you know, don't really do too much other than the normal tactics. And finally, as the runoff comes, we're like, no, she's not getting away with it. So if she doesn't come out and meet with us, we're going to go to her house, and we're going to say, we're having the community meeting, and you can come outside and meet with the community. And so that's the video that you showed. That was in March of 2020. No. Yeah. March. Is that right?
Yeah. 2020.
Oh, that's right. Because it is was it the prime? It was the primary.
Yeah, right before the primary. I think the day before the primary.
Or was it the general at that point? No, it had to be March 2020. It was not November. So it was March 2020. Right. That's what it was. We made it so she had to go into a runoff. That was so I'm sorry, trying to get all these dates together. March 2020, she was expecting to not have a runoff, because last time she had actually run unopposed. And so we go to her house the day before the primary and say, come out. And we're thinking this was not our first protest. It was our second protest in front of our house. So we go early in the morning, because she does these fundraising breakfasts that usually require that she be in the city between 7 and 8 a.m. Right. So we go at about 6 a.m. before she leaves. We're there with about 30 or 40 folks. We're not thinking much of it. We get our chairs set up on our sidewalk. We had prayed and poured libation and had a land acknowledgement. And then I say, come on, let's ring the bell and invite her out. And so that's why you see me very calmly walking to the door, ringing the bell, and expecting either her to not answer or her to say, oh, you know, I'm not coming out, right? What we didn't expect is for her husband to come down the stairs. We heard the gun cock at the front door and point this gun at us, point it directly at my chest and say, I will shoot you, right? We weren't expecting that to happen. And so I'm grateful that we were prayed up, because it enabled me to kind of sink into a space of like extreme calm, right? Even though, you know, it was a deeply traumatizing experience, I was able to summon that part of my spirit that just said, good morning, right? And that's what you hear on the video, because we were completely prayed up. And I'm grateful that the spirit work that we do is just as important as everything else that we do. So that's what you were seeing on that video. So he has been charged by the Attorney General. So he has been charged, and we'll see what happens with his prosecution.
Mm-hmm. And Jackie Lacey ultimately lost her election as a result of a lot of the pressure that you all placed upon her campaign, and highlighting her record of essentially allowing killer cops to kill people with impunity, which is just, it's absolutely absurd. And it's not unlike what we see happening across the country with district attorneys and county attorneys who are just as responsible for people being killed as these cops who are going out and killing people. Now, you know that, in Minneapolis, we suffered yet another loss at the hands of the police on May 25th of 2020, when George Floyd was killed. And in the midst of us grieving, us protesting and demonstrating, we have had a series of discussions that have happened in Minneapolis surrounding the Defund the Police Movement. And, of course, there's a number of differences of opinion about whether the police should be defunded or dismantled, or a new system, or whatever needs to take place. Can you explain for people what defund the police actually means, and what your perspective is on the matter?
My son walked in. I had to go on mute. So I always laugh at this question that, what does defund the police mean? It's really pretty apparent, that we mean take their money. That's what defund means, right? So we've been saying defund the police for at least the last 6 years. And where it comes from is we were engaged in protest when we were outside City Hall, and someone from a neighborhood council had been inside City Hall for a budgeting session. And they came across the street to where we were demonstrating, and they handed us the package that they had been given by the mayor. And in the package, it was open to this page that had a pie chart on it. And it showed that the city of Los Angeles was spending upwards of 50% of the city's general fund on LAPD. Now, this person was not a member of Black Lives Matter. They were a part of the neighborhood council system, but they were appalled that we were spending upwards of 50% of our city's general fund on police. And then we began to talk about it with everybody we came across. And everybody across political spectrums was like, 50%, that's ridiculous. And so we began saying, we've always been an abolitionist organization. We understand that policing finds its history, finds its foundation in slave catching. And so as absurd as it would be, as ridiculous as it would be to say, well, let's just keep the system of chattel slavery and reform it. Right? That would be ridiculous, right? That is the same ridiculousness with which we must meet the idea of reforming a vestige of chattel slavery like policing. Now, that's where I stand. I know most people in the world worry when we say abolish the police. They don't understand that that doesn't mean abolish public safety. It means policing is the least effective form of public safety. You can create safer communities when you invest in the things that people need, like when people are housed, when they have, access to fresh and healthy food, when they have mental health resources, when children, this from your work with Wayfinders, right? That when children have after school programs, quality after school programs. There was a study that the Rand Corporation did, which is not like some bastion of liberalism, right? That you can virtually eliminate youth crime just by having quality after school programs, right? So We know that when we say public safety comes from providing resources and building strong communities. Public safety for Black people has never meant more police. That said, when we say abolish the police, most people get scared. But when you show them a pie chart and say, do you think we should be spending upwards of 50% of our city's resources on police? Everybody goes, no way. Especially when they look and they see, you know, before the pandemic, there were 60,000 unhoused people in Los Angeles County, right? Now they're estimating that we're going to be up over 200,000, right? As a result of the pandemic and the economic fallout, the vast majority of whom are Black, right? Yeah. And so when we say defund the police, it becomes common sense to most people, because we say when you defund the police, Dr. Julia Malveaux always talks about how budgets are moral and ethical documents, and budgets are absolute zero-sum games. We know this just by managing our household budgets, right? When you go shopping and spend up your paycheck on the new jeans, you now no longer have money to order from Uber Eats, right? Mm-hmm. It's a zero-sum game. So now Los Angeles is up to spending 54% of its city's general fund on LAPD, which means that you're not housing your people. And this is a choice that's made by mayors like Eric Garcetti, who likes to pretend to be a liberal, but really is a bold-faced liar, right? They're threatening the city to bring it into receivership. Just yesterday, a news article came out about this because of the number of unhoused people. And he has been caught in blatant out and out lies about securing hotel rooms for unhoused folks. Well, you know what? Every unhoused person in this city could be housed if we chose to defund the police and put it into housing, as they've done in cities like Austin. Mm-hmm.
Well, one, thank you for that explanation, because as you said, a lot of people do become afraid when they hear defund the police without knowing, you know, what that entails, and also being concerned for their own safety. So in the city of Minneapolis, you know, there's a huge controversy right now. And a big part of it, in my opinion, just has to do with the ineptitude of our city council members who, and our mayor as well, who for years sat on their asses as people were being killed, as people were being brought into the justice system unjustly, as people were being beaten by Minneapolis police, and they did nothing. They quietly settled tens of millions of dollars in lawsuits. And out of all of these police killings that we've experienced here, the only officer who has ever been convicted was a Black Muslim Somali man named Muhammad Noor, who killed Justine Damon Rusacek, who was a white affluent woman. And our city council members and our mayor approved a settlement for $20 million for the family of the white woman who was killed. And meanwhile, Black people were being killed time and time again. Their families weren't even compensated. The same year that they approved the $20 million settlement for Justine, they approved a $200,000 settlement for a young man named Jamar Clark, 24 years old, as you know, killed by police in November of 2015. And they approved just over $700,000 for the family of Terrence Franklin, a Black man killed in 2013. And so this is the same city council where we've had to go disrupt their meetings, get on the record, try to get them to make changes to the system of policing, and they did nothing. And so finally, when we have this tragedy of George Floyd being killed and the world is watching Minneapolis, they suddenly use it as an opportunity to say they're going to do something. They're going to dismantle MPD. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. But the problem, one of the problems, was that they didn't take this to the Black community. Even though we are most likely to experience police violence and community violence, they took it to the white community in Powderhorn Park. And they used it as a way of grabbing headlines and trying to look progressive and to look like they're doing something. And so meanwhile, the Black community has experienced an uptick in shootings in the community, in carjackings and all kinds of things that has only heightened the sense of fear that people have. And so how do you deal with the response from people who are concerned about being preyed upon if there's not, police or some mechanism for public safety, or if it's not done right? Because our city council and our mayor, they don't have a background in any of these issues. They hadn't done research. They just kind of threw out a bunch of ideas to look progressive, to protect themselves politically, and they have bypassed the community that's most likely to be impacted.
Yeah, so when we say defund the police, we never say it on its own, right? We say defund the police and reimagine public safety, right? We say divest from police and invest to community-driven approaches to public safety. And so if your mayor, if your city council were serious, they'd look at cities like Newark, New Jersey, where one of my dearest brothers and my best friend, Akila Sherrills, has worked with another really revolutionary, one of the best mayors in this country, Raz Baraka, the son of Amiri Baraka, right, who's the mayor of Newark, where they've invested those dollars in creating community safety teams, which does a bunch of things, right? It hits it absolutely right in many ways. One, the community safety teams are developed out of the community itself. And oftentimes these community safety teams who are well-trained, who are brought together in kind of communal pods, right, are often returning citizens. So they've often been, formerly incarcerated, but they also are OGs in the community. So the community has a level of respect and love for them, right? And they have credibility and standing, right? So they can often get ahead of so-called crime. They can often see, okay, look, brother is struggling because he just lost his job. And he's not going to be able to get another one very easily because he has a record. What can we do to make sure that he gets enough to support himself without, crossing a line, right? And so they're able to get ahead of things. And what we've seen in cities like Newark, New Jersey, is drops, double-digit drops in the crime rate, even as the rest of the country's crime rate is going up. Even in the midst of this, the worst economic situation we've seen in either of our lifetimes for Black people. You've seen a flat, the crime rate has stayed flat in Newark because of these community safety teams, right? So if Minneapolis were serious, if Los Angeles were serious, if all of these cities around this country were serious, they would understand that defunding the police is actually probably the best approach to reimagining public safety and making safety a reality for the groups and neighborhoods that are most impacted by crime. So when you meet, it is common sense. When you say everybody in this community has what they need, think about what would have happened. So before George Floyd was murdered, in March, at the beginning of the pandemic, Black Lives Matter brought together virtually every single Black-led, Black-serving organization in Los Angeles County. And we issued something called the Black LA Demands. Because what we were seeing happen is, at a time, at this point, crime was virtually, there was virtually no crime because everybody was safer at home orders, there was no crime, right? And the economic hit hadn't really happened yet, right? But what we observed, because one of the few places you could go is to the grocery store, is I remember going to the grocery store, to the Ralph's right down the street from my house, and now they had these mask requirements. And I was walking out of the grocery store, and there was a brother who had a T-shirt tied around his face, because we're all getting used to masks, right? Mm-hmm. Didn't have a mask, but needed to go grocery shopping. He's coming out. They had police cars stationed in the grocery store parking lot what do? They begin harassing this young brother for tying a t-shirt instead of having an actual mask. Well, common sense would have said, why do we not just hire a couple of brothers from the neighborhood, have them stand at the front door at a grocery store and hand out masks? Then you would have hit the economic impact. You wouldn't have been criminalizing Black folks. And it would have really, fed this idea that we can make an economic turn that's beneficial. So I'm saying that to say that this is the worst economic fallout that we've seen in our lifetimes. Defunding the police makes sense, because when we defund the police, we can make sure that people have what they need. The mental health toll is just now being talked about, right? We can provide mental health resources. If we're not paying police to, in Los Angeles, they're still spending tens of millions of dollars on policing public schools when all the public schools are closed. Why are you spending this money to police empty buildings? We could use that. And so what I'm saying is they feed us this, there's a culture of fear, right? But the fear is misplaced. What we should be concerned about, the actual danger, is not providing people with the resources that they need. And so we need to invest, we need to spend, we need to make sure that we spend our dollars on resources, not police.
Right. And I think just along those lines, one thing for us to think about is to understand that it hasn't always been this way, right? Growing up in LA, being impacted by the war on drugs, which began in the early to mid 1980s, became a war on Black and brown people, particularly poor Black and brown people, that significantly shifted policing budgets and criminal justice budgets around the country, as well as at the federal level. And it really amplified this notion that policing and correctional work is really a jobs program for white men. A lot of the times when we're talking about policy changes, shifts in laws and shifts in policies, there's pushback from the police unions, from the correctional unions, from their allies, because they don't want to lose those jobs, those good paying jobs, with benefits, with pensions and everything else that comes along with it. And so a lot of times they want to keep these systems in place the way that they are, which does siphon off resources from our community, which has never received reparations, by the way, keep our communities ghettoized and keep us under social control. And so we're in a situation now where they have created a system of reliance upon policing, a system that does not work. But at the same time, people feel like they have to be able to call someone if they are being preyed upon, right? And so who do you call if someone is trying to break into your home or something, without you having to use deadly force? What do we do in a situation like that? I don't want to be reliant upon, they get on my last nerve because of the abuse, because of the way they criminalize our people. But at the same time, it's like, who do we call?
Right. So I'm going to answer that. And I just want to underline one of the points that you're making about police associations, which disguise themselves as unions. We need to remember that police associations are not unions. They are fraternal orders. They are protective leagues. They are not unions. Unions were built to protect the collective interests of working class people. Police really are fundamentally in opposition to every other working class person. And so it's important that we remember that when we think about Mike Brown, right? Leslie McSpadden, Mike Brown's mother, she is a union worker, right? When we think about Andres Guardado, his father is a member of Unite Here. He is a union worker and a union member. The police are protecting the interests of the capitalist class, which means that they are not part of organized labor. They only represent their very narrow interests, and they protect even the worst among them against the interests of every other working class person. So we refuse to even acknowledge them or call them unions. They are associations, protective leagues. They are organized crime. They are not unions. And so we're actually in Black Lives Matter, a part of we've recently launched a campaign called End Police Associations, because that's really kind of where we have to go in this moment. When you ask who should we call, and we've all been in situations where there's danger. And one of the things that I realized very recently, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll make this story quick. I think you know that in August of this year, my home was swatted. And I was here. I'm a single mother of 3 children. And it was in the middle of the day. And swatting is when someone calls in a false police report and tries to get the SWAT team to really respond with extreme violence. So the call tape sounds like a typical Southern white male supremacist. And he called in and said I was being held hostage along with 3 other people. And if they didn't come, that he was going to start killing us, right? Mm-hmm. And here's the thing, though. The operator said, well, why are you doing this? And he said, to send a message. And she said, what message are you trying to send? And then he said something that I won't repeat, but he said it, he was clearly targeting Black Lives Matter. He said, because Black Lives Matter is a bunch of blank. Mm-hmm. So they knew it was a targeting of Black Lives Matter, right? Nonetheless, police showed up with AR-15s, surrounded my house. There was a helicopter overhead, dozens of cops, right? I'm thinking, because I live in a neighborhood, not too far. I live 2 blocks from Crenshaw. Sometimes things get a little heated over here. I'm thinking some stuff just happened in the neighborhood. Instead, I finally hear over the loudspeaker that everyone in my address needs to come out with their hands up. I go and look at the front window, and officers run up to my window and point AR-15s at me. So I wind up going on Instagram Live, because I thought about Corinne Gaines, and I thought, well, if they're going to kill me, I don't want them to kill me with nobody watching. I want everybody to see what happened, So I got my children to the safest place in the house I could get them. And then I start to go outside while I'm on my live, right? Because I wanted to pull the police away from the house. I didn't want them shooting up the house.
Right.
When I go out, my neighbors are all in the street. And one of my neighbors from across the street, a Black couple, but the man, a pretty large in stature Black man, walks up to me and he goes, hey, sister, why are you coming out? And I said, I got to get them away from the house. My kids are in there. So he goes, okay. And he puts his body in front of me and his wife. I still can't tell it without crying.
Girl, I got chills. I got chills as I'm listening to this.
His wife stands next to me, like she's off to the right, just a little behind me, and he's directly in front of me. And he said, well, we'll walk towards them. The sergeant is saying, walk towards them with our hands up. We'll go together. He has his own 9-year-old son in his house. So the 3 of us walked to the line, this scrimmage line of officers. And it was clear bullshit, because the sergeant says, well, is anybody holding you hostage inside? And I said, no, and that was that. Now, if you really thought I was being held hostage, wouldn't you come and check the house?
Right.
No, right. It was so clearly the police weren't there to keep me safe. Mm-hmm. But my point in telling the story is, afterwards, I asked him, the brother's name is Otis. I said, Otis, why'd you do that? And he said, well, if they started shooting, I wasn't going to let you be the one to take the first bullet. So I'm very close to them now, right?
That's incredible.
But what I'm lifting up, and why I thought it was important to share this story, is we're trained to believe that who we call when we're in trouble is police. But who kept me safe was my neighbors. And there were dozens of other neighbors in the street filming. Afterwards, all the moms in the neighborhood brought me like flowers and cookies and said, we're here, right? I have a neighbor up the street who checked. He's like, every day when you leave, you got to tell me when you going and when you coming back, so I make sure you make it, right?
Right.
There were people from, further away that, we had to relocate for some time until we got some safety stuff in place at the house. They gave me their house, right? Wow. They gave me their house so me and the children could have a place that was safe to stay, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm saying that to say that when we get in trouble, when there is a safety issue, the answer has never been police for Black people. When you say someone's breaking in my house, think about how many times we hear stories of the person who called actually being targeted by the police that they called. I'm thinking about, people like J.R. Thomas, who was beaten to death inside his home in front of his 9 children because he was having a mental health challenge and called 911 on himself to get help. The answer is not police. The answer is building strong communities. So that when you see something strange happening at the house across the street, you get your neighbors. Think about what would have happened. Oh my God, why am I? A Tatiana Jefferson, right? Mm-hmm. When a Tatiana Jefferson, when the neighbors saw the door ajar, he is still tormented by the fact that he called 911 instead of going over and checking himself. A Tatiana would still be here. And so we have to develop mechanisms for building strong community. There's also policy work, and then I'll shut up. There's policy work that we can do in Los Angeles. Our former city council president has moved legislation that says for nonviolent calls, someone other than police has to be disciplined.
Absolutely. And mental health and everything else.
Right. So those are the things that we have to think about, that it's a lie when we think police bring safety. Police do not bring safety. Community brings safety. Resources bring safety. And if something's going down, I know I'm not calling 911, but I will call Brother Otis with the quickness to come over and make sure I'm okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story. That was so powerful. And also just reminding us of the power of our neighbors and people in our community, because we have always had to take care of ourselves and protect ourselves from the threat of white supremacy, abuse, and vigilante violence. I know that here in the Twin Cities, a lot of us have had to go out and get our licenses to carry in order to protect ourselves, because we know that when white supremacists show up, police are not going to protect us from them.
That's right.
They might give a nod or who knows what, right? Just like we saw with Kyle Rittenberg in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the 17-year-old who killed 2 protesters in the midst of demands for justice for Jacob Blake. And he was able to walk up with his hands up and give some kind of signal, and leave the scene of a murder, as a young, white, heavily armed man. So I totally feel you in terms of us reclaiming our power as a people and realizing that these systems don't work for us. And at the same time, we need to demand the resources so that there is more robust job creation and access to resources for our community. Someone commented earlier about child protection being another window, another extension of the system is able to essentially capture and kidnap too many of our children who do not belong in that system. So we're looking at the overall understanding of how the institution of slavery still rears its ugly head and its dangerous head, and how there's no real accountability for those who harm and oppress us. So the reason I want to talk a little bit about these cat ears, because I'm sure some people are wondering why, but I actually just left a protest before we came to do this podcast, and it's on behalf of a young Black woman, which I think illustrates a lot of what we're talking about here today. 646 of us were kettled on I-94 back in November. and we were held captive by the police for over 5 hours and arrested. And some people experienced police brutality as well during that period of time. I hold the governor and the head of public safety, who is a Black man, responsible for kettling us and abusing us. We were all charged with at least 2 misdemeanors, charges that are still pending at this point. But there's a young Black woman named Amina McCaskill, who is a college student at the University of Minnesota, who has actually been charged with felonies. And she's been charged with felonies for allegedly pointing a laser at police. But what she's saying is that it was, people are saying it was a cat toy. So at her protest today, demanding that the charges be dropped, they handed out these cat ears in order to show how absurd it is that you would criminalize and demonize and oppress a young Black woman who's out there standing up for freedom, justice, and equality, but you won't hold killer cops accountable. You won't hold abusive cops accountable. You won't hold them accountable for criminalizing our people in our community. And so that's what these cat ears are about. Her hearing is coming up on the 8th. So we'd ask Black Lives Matter LA stand in solidarity with us, to send some good energy for Amina. She is so brave, to stand up against the system for charges that she does not deserve. But before we wrap up our time here today, I want to shift to a couple of really quick topics that I think are positive, lights at the end of this tunnel that we're in, that we chose to be in, because we're not going to abandon our people just because of our education and the things that we've had access to. Our people deserve Black intellectuals, Black freedom fighters, anybody who cares about our liberation, standing up for them. So you were featured recently in a campaign by Levi's. I want Josh to pull that up. Josh, just like the second to the last link that I sent you. You were one of several activists who was featured in a new Levi's ad. Can you talk a little bit about that? I just see that as being so fun, with how heavy everything else is in this movement. And you look gorgeous, by the way. So talk a little bit about that campaign, if you will.
Oh, it was so much fun. So my sister, friend, comrade, Ogie, is a brilliant filmmaker and director. And she was at the head of this Levi's campaign. And she's the one who got me to be a part of it, along with people like Dolores Huerta and Carlos Montes and Jaden and Willow Smith were also part of it. What's the young sister's name who's the tennis star, the new tennis champ? The one that starts with an A, Naomi Osaka. Yeah, Naomi Osaka. She was a part of it. And it was just an incredible opportunity. To the way that Ogie directed it's called The Beauty of Becoming. And we wrote letters to our 14-year-old selves and had to give advice to who we were at 14. And so my advice to my 14-year-old self was to live in your purpose. And it was just a beautiful time. We spent half a day and got to get my makeup done. That dress that I'm wearing, it was customized. You can't see the back, but the back, across the back, it says Defund the Police. And on the front, it says BLM. So they custom made that for me. And it was just, it's one of, every now and then as organizers, we get to do cool stuff. And that was one of them. So I had a really good time doing that. And, there was some conversation on the internet that I saw, right, on social media that I saw, asking about, well, why would we do a Levi's ad? Well, I think, one, the conversation was important. I think, two, that supporting visionary Black directors and creatives is important. But also, I feel good about Levi's. Levi's has done a lot to quietly, and I don't ever say this because, we don't want it to be that people can buy us, right? But they've supported a lot of our families, and every time we ask them for something, they say yes. And so I think they saw this as another opportunity to kind of highlight the work of Black Lives Matter. And I thought they did so in a really ethical way where I don't feel exploited, right? Sometimes, at the height of things right after Brother George was killed, you saw every company in the world putting Black Lives Matter on stuff, but not actually supporting Black Lives Matter. And I think, I feel good about companies that actually support Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's beautiful. I'm so proud of you and excited for you. And you need to be highlighted. Black girls need to see you, right? And know what you're about and what you're doing, and to be inspired by the work that you do. I want to thank you on a personal level just for all of your courage, your tenacity, how you bring your experiences, your intellect, your access to the table for Black lives. It's very inspiring, and it's a blessing. And I'm glad that we know each other after all these years. It's incredible. One recent thing that just happened, which I think shocked a lot of people, is that Black Lives Matter has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. What's your take on that, as we prepare to wrap up our time together?
Sure. Well, let me just say, all the things that you've said about me, you're seeing a reflection of yourself, because, I'm grateful for you and you staying in this work, and I know what it's cost you. And I'm grateful that you understand that the struggle is worth every sacrifice. And so, that's why I call you not just my soror and friend, but, one of my dearest comrades. And I'm very grateful for your work, sis.
Thank you, sis.
So it means a lot that we've been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. It reminds folks of what we mean when we chant no justice, no peace, that in working towards justice, that's how we get to lasting peace. And so I hope that we'll have deeper conversations about it. I hope that this nomination means something in that regard. And, we're not in it for the recognition, but it feels nice to be acknowledged. It feels nice that folks who, might have been critical are beginning to rethink where they stand.
Absolutely. Well, it's a beautiful thing. It's a well-deserved thing. And it's amazing to finally see people taking it seriously and understanding that this is an extension of the fights that have come before us, and the resistance of our people against oppression. So thank you so much, Dr. Melina Abdullah. I have to put a doctor in there, girl, because you earned that. Everything else that you're out there doing, a mother extraordinaire, activist, freedom fighter, author, just everything. Thank you so much for all of your love for our people and just continuing to fight and hold up that banner for Black lives.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you too. And I hope the world opens back up quickly so I can see you in person.
Yes, I can't wait to see you again, Soror.
Yes. All right.